And we now welcome to our pulpit Reverend Michael Dowd as he will share his words of inspiration for us.
Thank you, Emmy, and thank you, Cassandra. That was absolutely fabulous. Oh, I'm just a little moved at the moment. I just thank you for this opportunity to speak with you all. This is such, to use religious language, this is such a holy time. Saints and sages and spiritual people throughout the ages have always said that to live the richest, most fulfilling life possible, it's really vitally important that you're in touch with your own mortality and that you keep the awareness of your mortality and our mortality as a guide. I'm speaking to you from Humboldt State University, which is like a ghost town, but this is my outdoor office. This is where I get that, so you'll hear the bells from the chapel. I think one of the great gifts of coronavirus, the title of this little homily is Reality 101, Coronavirus, Climate, and Compassionate Generosity. And I think what coronavirus and climate do more than anything else is remind us of our mortality. That can be painful, especially when we have expanded, as most progressives and liberals have over the previous decades, and in some cases centuries. We've expanded our sense of in-group to include a wider and wider swath of people, a wider number of diverse people throughout culture and around the world. And that can be difficult, that can be challenging. We grieve more when we love more. Joanna Macy, one of my great mentors, says the measure of your grief is the measure of your love. You wouldn't be feeling grief if you didn't feel love. So just briefly, when I speak of Reality 101, well, first of all, for those of you who have never heard me speak, my YouTube channel is Reverend Reality. And I see God as a mythic name for reality, that reality is telling us things through evidence that we now need to pay attention to. It's a life or death matter. Here's my creed in a nutshell, just so you know where I'm coming from. Reality is my God. Evidence is my scripture. The epic of evolution is my creation story. Ecology is my theology. Integrity is my spiritual path. And by integrity, I mean the practices and exercises that help us live in right relationship to reality. So reality is my God. Evidence is my scripture. The history of the universe, the epic of evolution, is my creation story, and ecology is my theology. Integrity is my spiritual path, and fostering accountability to the future is my mission. So Connie and I both, my wife, Connie Barlow, is a science writer, and we've been traveling North America for the last 18 years. We've spoken to almost half the Unitarian, probably more than half now, of the Unitarian Universalist denomination. We've spoken hundreds of times in other religious and secular contexts. And basically where science, inspiration, and sustainability intersect is what we're passionate about. And so Reality 101, what I mean by that is, what is the essence? What do we need to know about reality? Because if we don't know it, we're going to be confused. We're going to be angry. We're going to be fearful. So there are a few things that are vital to understand, especially in this coronavirus and climate era, that can evoke, that can nurture our compassionate generosity. The first is that reality is nested. We know this through the global collective intelligence that we call the empirical tradition, the scientific tradition. Nested reality, subatomic particles within atoms, within molecules, within cells, within organisms, within planets, within galaxies. Just like Russian nesting dolls, reality is nested and relational. That is, reality isn't like a complex clock, like the clockwork universe that we've been living in, that paradigm for the last several hundred years. Reality is nested and relational. And it turns out we're in the middle. We are made up of larger or smaller creative, intelligent realities, like our microbiome, for example, that we can't exist without. And we are dependent utterly on larger creative intelligent realities like the trees and the plankton and the food that we eat. So we are utterly dependent upon this relational cosmos in which we live and move and have our being. And our name or names for reality fundamentally determine our relationship to reality. So if we speak of, say, for example, the biosphere, the ecosphere, as merely an it, as we just merely call it the environment, well, then we deceive ourselves into thinking that we can exploit the environment for our benefit and as a place for our waste without any consequence. This is ecocidal. This is crazy. If we called the biosphere Gaia, or God, G-O-D-D-E is the way I typically spell it, because many feminists and Catholic nuns spell it that way. It's gender neutral. And what we're meaning, those of us who use that spelling, G-O-D-D-E, what we're meaning is reality with a personality, not a person outside reality. So like the whole cosmos and Gaia as one name would be God, G-O-D-D-E. It doesn't matter the name. What matters is the relationship. Does your worldview help you have a humble, respectful, and honorable relationship to primary reality? And by primary reality, I mean with the past, the ancestors, with the future, with our descendants, and with the larger body of life upon which we depend. So that's the first thing. Reality is nested, relational, and our names for it matter. Ultimately, it's a life and death issue in terms of how we refer to primary reality. The second thing is to understand that for the first 97% of human history, we lived more or less sustainable. That is, we lived with an I-thou relationship, not an I-it relationship to primary reality. In other words, every sustainable culture for which we have evidence throughout the history of humanity has related to what we would call in secular language the ecosphere as if it were God, as if it's divine. It turns out that relating to the biosphere as if it's divine is not optional. We either do that or we start degrading the soil, the forest, the water, the life upon which we depend. And so we have, over the last 6 or 7,000 years, we have over 100 examples of boom and bust cultures. It's called the rise and fall of civilizations, but civilizations go through a predictable boom and bust pattern. And this has happened ever since, well, a couple thousand years after agriculture began. We started creating these city-based civilizations and then empires and so forth. And they're all unsustainable because they all treat primary reality as it rather than thou. In other words, it's all about us. Human-centeredness, anthropocentrism, is the fundamental mark of unsustainable cultures. Ecocentrism, life-centeredness, is the fundamental mark of sustainable, or what I call honorable cultures, or faithful cultures. See, we talk about sustainable and unsustainable, but it's really faithful and unfaithful. When we're faithful to the ancestors, including our pre-human ancestors, in other words, being faithful to evolution, and when we're faithful to the future, that is our descendants, including, even if we go extinct, other species that will be here, when we're faithful to time and faithful to the body of life that nourishes us, then we treat the body of life as sacred. Sustainable cultures do that. Faithful cultures do that. Cultures that are human-centered don't do that. So here we now find ourselves in a coronavirus era with not just climate change on the horizon, but abrupt climate change on the horizon. And if you're not familiar with that distinction, climate change is sort of a gradual process that happens over many decades, centuries, millennia. Abrupt climate change is like 10,000 years of climate change in one human lifetime or less. And we are now already 25 years into abrupt climate change. In other words, there are patterns at work, self-reinforcing positive, it's called positive feedback, but it's certainly not positive from our perspective, but it's self-reinforcing feedback that are so large that it's literally some of these patterns are out of our control. In other words, if everybody woke up tonight, 7 billion humans or 8 billion humans woke up tonight, committed to doing the right things, and we tried to make everything renewable as fast as possible, it's likely that things will already spin out. So that's on the climate front. On the coronavirus front, we're also in that place that there are things that are in our control. I like those circles. There's a circle of what you have control over, your interpretations, your actions, your local actions. There's the circle larger than that, which is the things that you have influence on, but you can't control. And then there's the much larger circle of the things that you have really no significant influence over, and you definitely can't control it. So how the coronavirus spins out economically is out of our control. How some aspects of climate change most aspects of climate change spin out is now out of our control. So that old 12-step prayer, God, reality, life, I just choose life, life, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So there's so much now that coronavirus and climate are bringing to our mind, which is the fact that I hope, I know that denial is a very deeply rooted instinctual pattern. So you may reject this because that's what we do. We're all prone to denial, me too. But there is at least a 5% chance that you will die in the next year, or that somebody very close to you will die in the next year. There's at least a 5% chance. It might be more than that. There's at least a 50% chance that everybody on this call will not be alive 10 years from now. That can be looked at as, oh no, don't tell me that. Or that can be looked at as a spiritual gift that, oh, I'm mortal. We're mortal. Our species may survive this bottleneck. There may be pockets of humans, like in 700 different places around the planet, that survive this century and then continue for another 1 million or 2 million years before an asteroid or supervolcano or something takes us out. But no mammal our size lasts more than 3 or 4 million years at most. So we're going to go extinct, whether it's in the next 50 years or the next 2 million years, we're going to go extinct. And then life will continue. Evolution will continue. Glaciers will continue. The earth will continue. All of that. So being at peace with your mortality, that you could die in the next year and people that you love could die in the next year, that many of us, possibly the vast majority of us, could die in the next 10 years or sooner, allows us to be in that place of saying, okay, what matters most? I was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer 10 years ago. And one of the great gifts of that, when we were looking at the possibility I could die in the next 8 months, because I had a tumor the size of my fist in my spleen, and we were looking at the possibility I could die in the next 8 months. And I wrote a list of all the people that I had, that had been a blessing to me, that had been a contribution to me. And I started reaching out to them one at a time, just thanking them. When you thank somebody, especially if you haven't communicated to them in a long time, what a gift they've been to you, what a blessing they've been to you, you will make not just their day or week, you'll make their month. They will ride on the joy of that. The other thing I did is I made a list of all the people I had harmed or hurt or betrayed or had a negative influence on. Some of those were difficult conversations. There were 2 of the conversations where all I could say was, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I know what a jerk I was, and I'm really sorry. Those kinds of what they call completion conversations, if you're diagnosed with cancer and you've got a year to live, you start having these completion conversations. You start telling the people who've been a blessing to you how. You start apologizing and saying, I regret. I know I can't change the past. If I could go back and do it again, I would have done it differently. I just want you to know that I know I had a negative impact on you. These kinds of conversations, especially when we extend our compassionate generosity, and that's what I want to wind this little homily down on, which is that one of the things that is in our control, that nourishes us so deeply, no matter how scared we are, no matter how terrified for our loved ones we are, no matter how frustrated and angry we are at the political establishment and the economic insanity and the fact that, millions of people are losing their jobs and the stock market's doing okay. Like, what the, that's infuriating. And yet in those times, if we allow ourselves to just genuinely be with the fact that this might be the last year of my life, and if I think of that, like that, the biggest gift is we're present to what a miracle this day is. What a gift this day is. I was almost in tears actually walking on the campus because this is a ghost town. There's nobody here. And while I was walking to the campus here at Humboldt State University, just outside of Eureka in Arcata, I was moved almost to tears. My eyes were getting moist, just like how awesome it is to be surrounded by these incredible redwoods who remind me just how small I am. And so I invite us all in this time of coronavirus, when we don't know the ultimate impact, we could very possibly, we're most likely in the early stages of the next Great Depression. We're also at a place where any one of us and our loved ones could die in the next year or 2. And if the Arctic, if we see an ice-free Arctic where there's no ice or very little ice in the Arctic this September, and all that heat that was being reflected now absorbed into the shallow, our species we could see billions of people. All it takes is 3 of the 5 major food growing regions of the world to fail in the same year, and you've got 2 or 3 billion people dying. So all of that's possible. So that's scary stuff. And yet when we remind ourselves that what matters most are the people that we love, the people in our communities, the expression of generosity and care and kindness, to just call people. I also have a list of all the people that I just know. And I'm just reaching out to them 1 or 2 a day and just saying, hey, just wanted to check in these crazy times. If you die or I die in the next year or 2 from coronavirus, I just want to have a communication with you. Oh my gosh, I've had some of the most amazing conversations just in the last month. So let me bring this down. I invite us to own and not just tolerate, not just accept, but to cherish your mortality and our mortality. That's actually easy for us, or easier for us Unitarians, because we have a worldview grounded in evidence, grounded in ecology as theology, and grounded with the awareness that we're not separate from the universe, that we are the universe becoming conscious of itself, that we're an expression that human beings grow out of the planet in the same way that apples grow out of apple trees. So we are organically related to life. And knowing that allows us to know and embrace our mortality with no fear. And then our activism can be engaged. Those of us who are activists can be engaged from a place of fearless generosity, fearless compassion. Because when we accept that we could die in the next year, nothing has power over us. And then we can be truly a blessing, not just to the humans. My wife is one of the leading point people in North America in taking native trees, the seeds of native trees from a few hundred miles south, and planting them a few hundred miles north. This is totally legal, and it's called assisted migration. Turns out the difference between hundreds of native trees going extinct, hundreds of species of native trees in North America going extinct this century, and those same 100 species of trees surviving this century will depend entirely on humans assisting them in migrating faster than any other animal can move their seeds. So that's holy work. Building topsoil is holy work. Building community is holy work. So we have a lot of holy work to do. And as our hearts break, when we learn things that are just heartbreaking, may those hearts break open with compassion and generous, selfless action. And I'll go into this a lot more with awesome visual slides on Friday night. Amen.